You know, sometimes I get things wrong. And what I got wrong was not watching Superman and Lois. And it's not like I didn't want to watch the show. It's just I never got around watching it. So what happened was Superman and Lois ends the Arrowverse era on the CW. The Arrowverse started with Arrow in 2012 with Stephen Amell as Oliver Queen. I was in there in the very beginning of the first season when he had that book of people he's taken out. He said, Aubrey Graham, you have failed this city. Oh, man, I loved Arrow. And then there was Grant Gustin in The Flash, and you had Supergirl with Melissa Benoist. And then you had Black Lightning, which I felt like was canceled too soon. Yeah, and then you had League of Tomorrow, which I liked, but they kept on changing characters. But it was all right. But the CW went a different direction, and they canceled all these shows. And I didn't want to get... And Superman and Lois popped up on Supergirl, and it was part of some of the multiverse stuff they were doing with the Arrowverse. And I liked them as Lois and Clark. I just didn't want to get tied into another Arrowverse show, and they'll cancel it, so I didn't watch it. But I knew the series finale was coming up, and I was on X, and I saw Michael Cudlitz, who played Abraham on The Walking Dead. I said, "Oh, he's playing Lex Luthor? When did this happen?" So I watched. So I never watched Superman and Lois. And the first episode I watched, well, I mean, I might have watched it once. And the first episode I watched is the second to the last episode, where Michael Cudlitz is Lex Luthor. Man, his depiction of Lex Luthor. Listen, Michael Rosenbaum is always going to be the preeminent Lex Luthor from Smallville. He's the top. He played him longest. He's the standard. But the way that Cudlitz is playing him, he's playing him how Lex Luthor really, really is in the comic books. Businessman, reserved, violent, hair trigger, analytical, crazy. Man, like, Cudlitz is amazing as Lex Luthor. I just saw him on this one episode. And in a lot of ways, I wish Gene Hackman, and Gene Hackman is one of the greatest actors ever. But in a lot of ways, I wish Gene Hackman would have played Lex Luthor like that in the original Superman. But I think they went for more of a cartoony version because he had Ned Beatty and Valerie Perrine. I was like, man, because even as a kid, I'm watching, it's like, no, Lex Luthor is evil. Play him as evil, but Gene didn't do that. But the TV shows are actually, all the TV shows that's used with Lex Luthor has gotten it right. Like John Cryer and Supergirl, his Lex Luthor was fun. His Lex Luthor was like analytical. Kind of funny, but very analytical. And Cryer was fantastic as that Lex. Jesse Eisenberg, he was pretty good in Superman versus Batman. His Lex Luthor was pretty good. But the thing about Cudlitz is Cudlitz has the stature, because Lex was not a small guy. He was a statuesque guy. He could stand toe to toe with Superman, and it's like that's it. He's that guy. But let me give a shout out to Tyler Hoechlin and Bitsie Tulloch, who plays Superman and Lois. Moving forward, if anybody plays Clark Kent again, and again, they have a Superman movie. James Gunn has a Superman movie coming up. James Gunn is head of DC Studios. They have a Superman movie coming up soon. They shot it in Cleveland in the summer of 2024, this past summer. So we'll see how that unfolds. Rachel Brosnahan is playing Lois Lane. I like her. So I think she'll be fine as Lois Lane. And I really don't know the guy who's playing Superman, so we'll see. But moving forward, even with that film, anybody who plays Lois and Clark moving forward needs to watch Tyler and Bitsie. My favorite Lois and Clark for the longest time has always been Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher. Now, Lois and Clark as a series has not aged well. It was great for the 90s. But storyline wise, it hasn't aged well. But those two were two attractive Lois and Clarks. One of my favorite magazine covers ever is Terry Hatcher when she's wrapped up in the Superman cape. Oh, oh my God, that's a fantastic photo. Christopher Reeve will always be the best Superman. And I like Margot Kidder a lot, but I never saw the attraction between those two. She was Lois Lane, and he was Superman / Clark Kent, but I never saw, like, why would Superman be attracted to Margot Kidder? Like I never saw that. And even with Henry Cavill's Superman, who is like to me has always been like the number 2 Superman behind Christopher Reeve, his Lois Lane was Amy Adams, and I love Amy Adams. You know, American Hustle is still one of my favorite films that she was in. But I never saw her as Lois Lane. Like Margot Kidder, I saw as Lois Lane. I just didn't see the attraction. With her, I never saw her as Lois Lane, even though Henry Cavill's fantastic. Tyler and Bitsie are the true Lois and Clark couple. I mean, they're a married couple. They're married with children. They love each other. They always have each other's backs. He cracks corny jokes. She rolls her eyes. They are a true married couple. It's just the only difference is he wears a cape. But she still has the spirit. She still has that Margot Kidder spirit of Lois Lane when she's not being pushed around. Like Margot Kidder's Lois Lane was tough. Bitsie's Lois Lane is tough, but also very vulnerable at the same time. And Tyler Hoechlin, he is kind of like like right between Christopher Reeve and Dean Cain, where he's like a really good looking guy, but at the same time, he has the same thing Christopher Reeve has. Christopher Reeve plays Superman with a wink and a smile. He played him with a guy like, yeah, you know, I'm from Krypton. I'm this dude. I could play really nerdy or really strong. Like the thing about Cavill's Superman was he was a far better Superman than he was Clark Kent. Like I never bought him. It's like, this dude's not geeky. And Dean Cain's Superman, his problem was Dean Cain as Clark Kent. I liked him as Clark Kent. It's just, I never really bought him as Superman. It's like, nah, you're too pretty to play Superman. I like you better as Clark. So in a lot of ways, Tyler's Superman is kind of the closest to Christopher Reeve's Superman. But man, this show is fantastic. And I'm kicking myself because at the beginning of the second to the last episode, they showed a lot of flashbacks of what's going on with Lex and Clark and Lois. It's like, oh my God, like I missed all this stuff. And they had Doomsday in this. Doomsday was in the Superman versus Batman film. I think Dawn of Justice. And that Doomsday storyline, that character's like, it's not really the comic book. But this Doomsday in the series is fantastic. And the way that second to the last episode ended, it was like, oh my God. What was that? Oh my God. That is such a good show. I feel like James Gunn dropped the ball by not moving the show into a feature. James Gunn has his own visions of what Superman is supposed to be. So that's fine. But I really do think they dropped the ball of not making a Superman and Lois film. Just like they dropped the ball by having Ezra Miller playing the Flash when you had Grant Gustin, who's playing the Flash on TV. Grant Gustin, when Ezra Miller was having all those problems, they should have brought in Grant Gustin, but they didn't. But I also blame CW too, because CW, I don't know what they're doing now. They've made a pivot. They got all these sports shows on. They have WWE's NXT, which I enjoy. I love NXT. But they have college football. They all have NASCAR. It's almost like they're trying to make themselves into a quasi sports network. And it's like, no, like the CW's bread and butter has always been supernatural shows, fantasy shows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, Supernatural, Arrow, Flash, Black Lightning, Supergirl, League of Tomorrow, Superman Lois. That's the shows. The Vampire Diaries. Like these are that's the audience that they should continue to cater to. Is that I don't even know. The only show that I've liked that is still on is All American, but All American, most of the original cast is gone now, so I don't think that show's going to last much longer. So the CW, if I was them, I would say, you know what? Maybe we should have changed our mind about Superman and Lois. Like maybe we should pivot this idea of canceling this series. I mean, they're not going to do it, but if I'm the head of the CW, I'm saying like, no. We need to bring Superman and Lois back or bring out something that's similar and do what we were successful at. So tell me about Superman and Lois. Have you watched it? Because a lot of people watched it from the beginning and they love it. What do you think about Superman and Lois from the very beginning to the end? What do you think about Michael Cudlitz playing Lex Luthor? What do you think about Tyler and Bitsie with their version of Lois and Clark? And tell me, who is your favorite Superman and what is your favorite Superman project?